In today's video of Know Your Gear Deep Dives, we're going to be checking out the Epiphone 1959 Les Paul. But before we get started, I want to thank the people at Sweetwater. They're sponsoring this video. They sent this guitar out so we could do this deep dive. Let's start off with the specifications.
So starting off, this guitar is a 24 3/4 inch scale length neck with 22 medium jumbo nickel frets on a 12-inch radius Indian Laurel fretboard and mahogany neck. Now the body is solid mahogany with no chambering, and it has a 1/4 inch maple cap with a AAA maple veneer. Now the finish is a aged gloss polyurethane finish. We'll get on that with the geeky stuff. It also has a Graphtec new bone nut, and of course, like all Epiphones, it's made in China. Now, it looks like the electronics is where they're spending the majority of the money to make this guitar. They're using real Gibson Burstbucker pickups, a Burstbucker 2 in the neck and a Burstbucker 3 in the bridge. They're using 4 CTS pots, 2 volume and 2 tones with Mallory capacitors. They're also doing the 50s era wiring. They have a 3-way Switchcraft toggle switch and a Switchcraft output jack. Now, I haven't looked inside this guitar yet, so we'll check that out in a second. But by these specifications, this is better than what I've seen in actual Gibsons lately. Now, with the hardware, it comes with a Locktone 2-pneumatic bridge with stop bar tailpiece. That means that it locks into place so that when you change strings, it doesn't fall on the floor. This is one of my favorite features because we've all experienced that when it falls on the floor when you're changing your strings, and it sucks. It also has Epiphone Deluxe Kluson style 18-to-1 non-locking tuning keys, and it has non-locking strap buttons. A pleasant surprise with this guitar is it includes a really nice premium case. It's made to look exactly like the Gibson Custom Shop case in brown with the pink interior. Of course, it came with the Sweetwater 55-point inspection card because this came from Sweetwater. And in the compartment, you see the key for the case and, of course, a ton of stickers and some paperwork on the guitar. The other thing worth noting about the case is definitely not as strong and as robust as the Gibson counterpart, although keep in mind, the Gibson case sells for well over $200 to $300. So this case is just not a $200 to $300 case, but it is cool, and I would imagine the value is about $100. So starting with the geeky stuff, you can see here the neck is straight with just a little bit of relief. Looks really good. And if we look at the action, looks like it's sitting at about 2 millimeters. Now technically it's right about 2.25, but you can see it's really close. I'm going to call it 2 millimeters, but you can see it's close to 2.25. Let me know in the comments what you thought, if it's 2.25 or 2 millimeters. Now looking at the frets, the first thing you're going to notice is they're not using the binding to go over the edge of the fret like they do on the Gibsons. That's something you usually don't see on the Epiphones, and this one is no exception. The frets though look good, so let's get into that. Now looking at the frets, I took the rocker out and I found a couple high frets. You can hear this one clicking. But I'd like to point out that it didn't cause any issues. Sometimes they'll come up on the fret rocker, but they don't make any issues with the playing of the guitar or the sounds. In fact, in the next section, when I play it, you'll see that there's no issues that are noticeable at all. So now we're going to do the sock test and try the fret ends to see how well they were polished and if there's any fret sprout. And they feel pretty good. There's a little bit of snagging when I get past the 12th fret. So just above the 12th fret, you can see just a couple light marks. Definitely a 4.5 out of 5. Okay, so let's do the bass side of the guitar. This one, you can feel it. In fact, you see it snag? Just that one fret snagged right there, and you can see it's a little bit worse, but this is still not that bad. I'm gonna do it one more time. It looks like it's mostly, again, above the 12th fret where the problems are. I would definitely put this as a 3 out of 5, maybe a 2.5, but definitely a 3 out of 5. When it comes to the neck carve, I'm sure you won't be surprised to find out that it's a 1959 Les Paul neck carve. However, if you see, it's a little smaller than this template, and that's because 1959s and 1959 custom shops have different kinds of necks. Some are smaller, some are thicker, some are slightly wider. And this one, I'm happy to say, is on the smaller side, which means it's still chunky, just not very chunky. Here you can see on the 11th fret, it's a little bit more filled out, but it's one of the better 59 necks that I've played. Now, in some of these deep dives, I show you how you can test the nut slots without any tools at all. I'm using a radiused fret wire tool that I made. It's basically, I matched the fret wire and its radius to the fretboard. And when I slide it underneath the nut, I want it to act like a 0 fret. And if the strings are laying right on it, I know the slots are cut perfectly. The slots on this are great, and the low E is just a little shallow. You can also see on the low E slot that not only is it not cut deep enough, there's a little bit of leftover material for when they were slotting this. Now, my guess is it came pre-slotted to the factory and all they had to do was just use the fret files to deepen it or widen the slots. But this happens. I'm going to show you how you can fix this, even if you don't have any fret files. This nut was slotted for 10 to 46 gauge strings, and we're going to take a 36 gauge strings and we're going to wrap some sandpaper on it. I use 800 grit, but you just need to use 400 or higher. Wrap around real nice and tight. and then you kind of squeeze it like it's like the last bit of toothpaste. You can see how you just want it to be really tight so it forms around. And basically what you have is a little makeshift file there, and then all you have to do is file it. But what I want you to pay attention to is the angle. You don't want to go flat. You want to come at a downward angle, almost like you're following the headstock. What's nice about this is you can even see how you can bend it to the left and the right to smooth out the edges. And as you can see, you're not taking away much material, you're just smoothing it out. All right, let's do some measurements. We have the nut width at 43 millimeters or 1.68 inches. The thickness of the neck at the first fret is 22.74 millimeters or 0.9 inches. And the thickness at the 12th fret is 26.04 millimeters or 1.01. Moving over to the electronics, the first thing we want to do is verify the pickups are actual Gibson pickups. These are actual Gibson burst buckers, and we did verify that. They're the same ones you would find in a USA-made Gibson. How do I know that? I have hundreds of different pickups in the shop where I wind pickups, and I was able to compare them to some actual Gibson burst buckers. So let's take a look at those burst buckers. Taking a look at the pickups, we see the bridge is reading in at 8.41K, and it puts out about 215 millivolts, and the EQ curve is mostly in the treble area. The neck pickup is putting out at about 8.13K. It sits in at about 202 millivolts, and its EQ curve is almost identical, again, mostly in the treble side. Now let's get into the electronics in this guitar. The first thing you're going to notice is there's no shielding. That's very typical with Gibson guitars. Most of them don't have shielding. Do you need shielding in a guitar like this? I don't think so. What I usually suggest to people is if you have a 2-conductor wire humbucker like these where it's heavily braided, I don't think you need to shield the guitar. Sometimes what I suggest, if you end up swapping the pickups to 4-conductor wire pickups, which has a thinner foil shielding around them, I might insulate it then because you have thinner wires and you're going to be doing coil splitting. Okay, so looking at the potentiometers, you have 4 500K CTS potentiometers and 2 Mallory capacitors, and everything looks nice and tidy. No issues. I see the soldering looks fine. I don't see any issues sticking out at me. So you can also see that Switchcraft output jack. One thing they obviously stuck with is they're using a plastic base plate for the output jack. Not my favorite. I understand why they do it. It's tradition. It's the way it's always been with the Gibson and Epiphone guys, but I do prefer those metal ones for the longevity purposes. Another nice little touch is an actual metal limited edition since 1873 medallion covering up the 3-way switch. And for verification purposes, here is your Switchcraft 3-way switch. And again, this cavity is also not shielded, which is very typical for Gibson and Epiphone. Some of the things you might be asking is construction-wise, what makes this Epiphone different than the Gibson? So what I did is I used a dry erase marker to trace out some things to explain. First, the Epiphone is a 5-piece neck. So what you have is a scarf joint where the headstock meets the neck. You can see where I traced it right here. A scarf joint is where they take a piece of wood, cut it at an angle, flip it over, glue it, so that way they don't have to cut the entire neck out of a thick piece of wood. And then of course the 2 wings that are glued onto the sides. They also glue a piece of wood onto the base of the neck where the neck joint is, and again, so this is so they can save wood and not have to use such a thick piece. Structurally, it's very sound, especially since the Epiphone has a 14-degree angle headstock versus Gibson's 17-degree. I would actually trust this more than a Gibson. Now, the body is a 2-piece mahogany body, where if you get a 1959 or R9 Gibson custom shop reissue, it's going to be a 1-piece body. But the workmanship on this was fantastic. The seam was very hard to see. I really had to spend some time looking. Price-wise, this guitar sells for $850 US, and if you're looking for comparable brands, I would look at the Sire guitars. The L7 is fantastic at $600, and of course Eastman guitars, which are going to be a lot more if not double, but of course very good as well. Used, you can find them for as low as $625 and as high as $800, and this information is based off actual guitars that sold. Weight wise, this guitar was 8 pounds 4 ounces. That's because I picked it from Sweetwater. However, be aware the weight range is between 8 to 10.5 pounds. And before we get to those sound samples, I know some of you are going to ask this. Hey, it says on the spec sheet that this is the long glued in Tenyon. As you can see, there it is. It's right there. Let's see how this guitar sounds. I'm going to run it through my Fender 65 Deluxe Reverb with a stock speaker. It's got an SM57 mic'd up, and I'm not using any additional effects. And let's start with that. I want to play with the tone controls a little bit. Here's the bridge.
So now we're in the middle position.
For the overdrive tones, we're going to be using a Freeman Dirty Shirley Mini, and we're going to run a little bit of reverb in the effects loop, mic with an SM57. So let's get into that.
It's a rock machine for sure. When we go to the neck pickup, it's huge. Now let's see how it cleans up. I'm gonna roll the volume halfway. And that tone control, that Mallory tone control, let's roll that back a quarter turn. I mean, you don't even need you don't even need two channels for that amp to work. So what are my final thoughts on this guitar? Well, first, I think the easy part is the sound-wise, they nailed it. They got the great pickups in there, they got great electronics in there, and they spent a lot of time with the tone, which is important because without the flash and the, the hey, I own a custom shop or a real vintage Les Paul, this is just all the stuff that matters, the tone and the feel and the look. It's got it. So that's what it nails. It doesn't feel like a nitrocellulose lacquer guitar, and that's a positive and a negative. So in other words, if you don't like the way that stuff feels a little sticky, this is gonna feel smooth and slick. Well, the nitro lacquer will feel a little bit more sticky. However, if you like the nitro lacquer, this might feel a little bit more plastic feeling to you. The neck feels really good. I'm really happy with it. It's on, like I said, think of it as like just a slightly chunkier, medium-sized C neck. And the fretboard edge feels slightly rolled. Again, not sharp to the touch, but not that huge rollover feel, but right in a place where most players will not have an issue with it unless you really like your fretboards really rolled over. When I looked out there, it has really good reviews. It seems like players are really, really liking this guitar. It's definitely helping the resale value, as we showed you earlier. The resale value is pretty strong on this guitar. The only thing, I think the negatives on the guitar for a lot of players are the Indian Loyal fretboard. I think a lot of players would prefer to have it, not only aesthetically, but just, to have it, a rosewood fretboard. Well, on that note, we're gonna close out this episode. I just wanna thank you guys so much for your time, supporting the channel in all the ways you do, especially hanging out to the end of the video. As always, I wanna thank you. Until the next time, know your gear.